Hello class, this is Jessica Jacobs again. This week we are going to work with functions a little bit more, the intermediate functions that we started last week. We just want to build on those, do some more work with formulas, make sure everyone is really starting to be very comfortable with these, and then in the coming weeks we'll really sort of build all of this out. So again, we're kind of laying the groundwork here, adding a couple little new things, but mostly sort of just continuing to work with these functions that we started last week. So I'm going to work with the demo exercises for this week. You can follow along if you like, but you do not need to turn these in. On the first sheet here, we'll start with the functions sheet. A theme I want to get across this week and in the coming weeks is whenever you get handed an Excel spreadsheet, you always want to just sort of step back and familiarize yourself with what you're looking at. You can't dive in and start doing calculations and things until you really know what's going on, how the sheet's organized. You want to get a lay of the land. So on this first functions worksheet, you can see this appears to be some sort of employee list where there's an employee name column, what building they work in, what department, what status, when they were hired, how long they've been there, what sort of benefits they get, and then their salary, and then some sort of rating. So we want to look at that, see what we've got, understand how this is set up, and then we'll go over and figure out, okay, what do I want to do with this? So for this example, we're going to do some function review, and I want to zoom in a little bit here. Maybe not quite that much. We want to figure out how many full-time employees there are, how many half-time, and then we're going to do some salary calculations with those. And you can see in this example, if I scroll down, this is a very long list. So unlike last week where we could sort of eyeball things and count in our head, this week you can see how these functions are really going to be much more helpful to calculate things that there's no way you would be able to count by hand. So this says how many full-time employees are there. So this is asking for a number, how many. So that tells us we're going to count. And then again, there's some sort of criteria here. So we want to add some sort of if function with that. So we're going to use the count if. Count something up if certain criteria are met. So I'm going to click in this gray shaded cell and start typing equals count if. And since that was the last one I used, it popped up right away. For you, it might end up being any one of these count functions down here. Again, this just sort of pre-populates and gives you a cheat to just get you going. Gives us little syntax. It's going to look for a range, comma, and then the criteria. So the range is always the range of cells that we're looking in, and then what criteria are we looking for. Now, we just saw that this was a really long list, so you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to start clicking on D2 and then keep going down, but you're going to have to go down for quite a while. That can be a bit cumbersome. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to delete that. Instead of doing D2 all the way down to D1000 or whatever it might be, you can actually click on the column itself. I can roll over the D or the E or whatever I'm looking at and just click on the column letter. And notice how it just says D to D. And so this is going to look at the entire column. It's a very quick way to select that. There's nothing else, below it that's going to be confusing for it. And I'm not worried that the status label is caught in there because I'm not looking for that label. So I can click on that, then type comma, and then it's looking for the criteria. And so the question is how many full-time. Since this is text, it needs to be in quotes. So I'm just going to type full-time and then end it with a parenthesis. So I have count if, look in column D, look for full-time people. I hit enter, and there are 393 people. Now notice I got that little green triangle there, a little warning, unprotected formula. Don't need to worry about that. That's just sort of referring to those other blank cells that are beyond cells with content here. So I'm just going to ignore that error. Okay, so then how many half-time? Again, count if. Let's just do it again. We could copy and paste the other and modify it, but let's just go through it once more. Count if. I'm looking for column D, anyone who is half-time. So again, I put half-time in quotation marks. That looks good. I hit enter, and there are 96. So then it's asking for total salary of full-time. What this tells me is I'm looking to add things up, so sum them up if certain criteria are met. So I want to use the sum if. So again, I start typing equals SU, then I click sum if. So here again, notice now I have the range, the criteria, and then the sum range. So again, what range are we looking at for what criteria? So we're looking in D for full-time people, and then we're going to add up what range, and that's going to be the salary. So the sum if has 3 parts, and it's just sort of figuring out which one goes where. But first, I always just remember, first you got to tell Excel what you're looking for, then you got to tell it what to add up. So I'm going to look in column D for full-time people, comma, so look in D for anyone full-time. Once you find those, then add up the salary that corresponds with that in column H. So I'm summing it if that criteria are met. So when it won't add up other things, it'll only add up wherever it sees full-time, it'll add up that salary. Hit enter, and it's not formatted as a currency right now, but I could go ahead and format that. Again, up here in the middle of the ribbon, I could change that to currency. Those hashtags or dollar signs, that's not an error, it just means the number is wider than the column. So if I just pull this to the right, notice they appear there. So again, that's not an error. I could dial down the decimal points if I like. Total salary of contract. Again, let's do a sum if. I have to say, where does it list contract employees? It lists it in this status column, column D, comma, contract, in quotes. Wherever you find contract, then add up the salary in column H. And I hit enter, and again, I could format those as currency and dial down the decimal points there. So there is a new function here, the if function. And it's sort of if on its own. So you're basically just looking for an answer to something. It's like kind of like computer programming where you're asking Excel to spit out an answer. So this says, who makes more, full-time or contract people? Now, we have just figured out the total salaries of the full-time and the contract people. So obviously we could look at it right now and say, okay, clearly full-time makes more. But there are scenarios where, you know, you're working with formulas on different sheets or this or that you don't necessarily have, you're not looking right at those. You're referencing in some other things where you'd want to do an if function. So for now, we're going to actually just learn how to do it even though we can see it. So we start typing equals if. Now this looks a little tricky, but it's really not that hard. It says if, and then says logical test, comma, value if true, comma, and value if false. So really, you're just giving it some sort of test and saying, if that happens to be true, spit back one value. If it happens to be false, spit back another value. So this makes more sense as soon as we do it here. Basically, we're saying, which is greater, this box or this box? Which was higher? So we say if full-time is greater than contract. So that's the logical test. So if that is greater than that, you put a comma, and then the value if true. So if that happens to be true, if this is greater than this, the answer is full-time. Then that means full-time makes more. If that's not true, let's say that was less, and then that means contract is more. So that's meaning if that's not true, if that's false, then it turns out this one makes more. And so we put contract. And we'll do this again in the coming weeks, make a little bit more sense as you do more of them. And also with all of these, if some way that I explain it doesn't quite make sense, you can just kind of quick Google it, look at Microsoft Help. Sometimes just a way someone else explains it can really kind of make it hit home for you. So we say if this is greater than this, the answer is full-time. If not, the answer is contract. Hit enter, and it spits back full-time. Okay, average salary. We did this last week. We're going to do an average if. Again, we have to, this is just like sum if, but we're averaging it. So we're saying first, look in column D for anyone who's full-time, comma, then average out their salary. So just like sum if, but we're doing average if. hit enter. Now notice, you're like, what? That's a date. This is just formatted as a date right now. And we'll get into dates a little more in the coming weeks. But this is just a formatting issue. All dates in Excel are actual numbers behind the scenes. So we just need to change this formatting, and we'll put it to currency. And notice then it says $61,000, which makes more sense. Okay, so speaking of dates, you can do calculations with dates in Excel. So if I click on this cell over here in this hire date column, notice it says 11/1/99, but it says it's formatted as a date. If I switch that formatting to number, I get this 36,000 number. Basically, from January 1st, 1900 until now, Excel gives every day one. It adds 1 to every day. So January 1st, 1900 is 1. January 2nd, 1900 is 2. All the way up to today when the numbers are in the tens of thousands. So the equivalent number for January 11th, 1999, that's the 36,171st day since January 1st, 1900. So you're like, why get all goofy with this? What this allows you to do is add and subtract dates as if they were numbers. So you could say like, oh, these invoices are 54 days outstanding. You can make calculations. How old is something? How long has something been on the market? So on and so forth. And so because of that, because this is really just a formatting thing that makes it look like a date, Excel sees this as a number. We can add and subtract, and we can run calculations on them. So what this means is when I say, what is the most recent hire date? Based on what I just explained, the most recent hire date is the highest number. So like the highest number in dates in Excel is today. So the most recent is the max number of whatever is in the column, and the oldest, which is the lowest number, is the min number in this column. So this is really just a max and min. So I'm going to type equals max. And again, I don't have to select all the range of cells. I can just click on max of E to E. Click on the entire column and hit enter. And since this is formatted as a date up here, it says it's December 19th, 2012. Let's do the same thing with this one, min, in column E. Again, that's because that's the lowest number, the oldest one. Hit enter, and that's someone in 1998, which is obviously further back in time from 2012. So that's just a quick review, a little bit about dates and adding in the if function. I'm going to do 2 other short videos about conditional formatting and cell referencing on this same sheet. And then the final video for this week will be just a quick homework overview.